Matthew Palmieri from New York. Putin said, when the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff. Is he threatening to use nuclear weapons, or is he dangling it?
Look, the Russians have published their nuclear posture. There are, in principle, two circumstances under which Russia will use nuclear weapons. The first is if they are attacked with nuclear weapons, they will respond in kind. The second one is if the survival of the Russian state is put at risk. And one would imagine that if NATO sought to empower Ukraine to carry out a proxy conflict that targeted the Russian homeland, that if this went bad for Russia, then Russia would use nuclear weapons to rectify the situation. So I think what Putin is doing is re-educating NATO on the reality of what they've got involved in. I mean, we need to stop pretending that Putin is somehow the aggressor here. I mean, if you look at the TV and everything, this is Putin's fault. He started this war and he's threatening nuclear weapons. Shame on Putin, that brutal aggressor. That's not what happened at all. I mean, we can go back to 1992 and find NATO speaking about the need to break Russia up into constituent parts. One of the reasons for NATO expansion was to contain Russia. The goal of the United States and the European Union and NATO has always been, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, to prevent Russia from resurrecting itself into a modern day version of the Soviet Union. The collective West decided that they were never going to allow Russia to do this. This is one of the reasons why they promulgated the coup d'etat in February of 2014 that overthrew the legally elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, and tossed him out of power. And this is why the population of Donbass, and everybody calls them separatists. Hey, pro-hint, stop. They're not separatists. They were the people supporting the legally elected president of Ukraine. They're the ones who sat there and watched a coup take place that empowered neo-Nazi ultra-nationalists who called the Russians orcs, who then promulgated laws that sought to, dehumanize the Russians and began a brutal campaign of murder, rape, torture. Odessa, 2014, May, pumping 150 people into the trade building, setting on fire, 84 die. Then moving in, the assault on Mariupol, then moving into Donbass, and finally the rightful citizens of Ukraine, the ones who recognize the legitimate government of Ukraine, said enough. We're calling it quits. They're not separatists. They're the original defenders of what Ukraine should be. So, this is NATO's fault. NATO seeking to expand, NATO using Minsk as a shield to buy time so NATO can train a Ukrainian force that can, complete the coup-based assault on the Donbass, maybe evict Russia from Crimea. And so when Russia responds finally, after exhausting every means possible short of war to resolve this thing peacefully, it wasn't Russia that rejected Minsk. It was Ukraine. It was France. It was Germany under pressure from the United States. It wasn't Russia that sought to take over the Donbass. Russia always said that the Donbass is part of Ukraine. Russia respected the territorial integrity. If they refused to acknowledge the independence that the referendum that was passed in 2014, Russia always said, no, we'll resolve this thing peacefully. It wasn't Russia that altered that equation. It was NATO coming in and creating a de facto proxy NATO army on Ukrainian soil for the sole purpose of attacking the Russian people. So Putin said, enough. He initiates a special military operation. And what does NATO do? Pump in tens of billions of dollars worth of equipment to the Ukrainians, effectively building a NATO army on Ukrainian soil and then launching an attack. And Russia's had it. They're fed up. And so Putin is finally putting in place the necessary steps needed to resolve this issue. And he's reminding NATO that Russia don't mess around. He said, I don't bluff. We have nuclear weapons and we will use them if necessary. So it's a warning to NATO that after the referendum that are taking place right now, referenda, in the territories in Ukraine, and they are incorporated into Russia as it's expected to do, that becomes the homeland, the motherland. It becomes Russia proper. And any continued NATO facilitation of an attack on the Russian homeland will have consequences. I honestly believe that Russia has a lot of capabilities far short of nuclear weapons that would be utilized prior to nuclear weapons being used. But at the end of the day, if NATO wants to continue to ratchet things up, perhaps even to the point of getting involved themselves in Ukraine, Russia's putting them on notice that that this would be terminal for NATO, terminal for the world.
Yeah. So would it be more accurate, actually, to say that Putin is not so much referring explicitly to nuclear weapons? He's not excluding them, right? Because there are more high-powered weapons. Yeah.
Yeah, we have capabilities.
Right. I was making fun of that woman, you know, with the cereal dangling because she has the tone of a school teacher, you know, scolding naughty kids, you know, and so did the other reporter, too. It's amazing. But how about this, though, Scott? There must be some significance to the protests that are breaking out in Russia. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, let's get the angle of there. How many are there? Russia's a nation of what, 134 million people. Moscow is a city of more than around 10 million people, and they've got 1,000 demonstrators in the streets. Look, Russia is a democracy, and one thing we have to recognize is that Putin at the height of his power. All right, let's listen to the lady. It's the lives of our children. I can guarantee you that none of these ladies here, these anti-Putin people, none of their sons served in the military, so they're not at risk of having it, because if you didn't serve in the military, you're not getting called up. These are anti-Putin protesters in a nation where, even with the popularity of the war, there's still 20% of the people, 15-20% of the people who are anti-Putin. So you're going to get demonstrations like this. But the notion that this is somehow Russian people rising up against Putin is absurd. Replace this video with the video of the men reporting to the military reception areas, where families, cities, towns, the nation is coming out to bring them in. This is pathetic. That dude right there with the long hair and the beard, he never served in the military. What's he worried about? He would never get called up. They're not calling up people who haven't served. Only military veterans. At this point in time, military veterans with prior combat service are getting called up. So no, I have no use for these people. They literally, go ahead and demonstrate, but for the Western media to somehow spin this into massive demonstrations, massive unrest, literally isn't true.
Well, what about the way the cops are manhandling the protesters? I mean, we can't tell exactly what happened from that footage, but it does look like they got undue rough treatment. What was on that?
Well, I'm not there. Did they file proper paperwork for this? Did they go through the motion? Well, I
don't know what's
Jeff.
required in Russia. I don't know what's required in Russia. I mean, all I have to compare it to in my mind is the way it goes here in the U.S.
Russian police are Russian police. Russian law is Russian law. I'm worried about the way American cops, handle protesters that do file the appropriate paperwork. But you're going to sit here, and there's a lot of things we don't know about that protest. But what I'll tell you is that protest isn't as big as they are, and the cops are arresting people. How do you arrest somebody who's resisting, Jeff? You tell me.
No, that's why
and you throw them into a paddy wagon. That's the way it's always been done. The Russian cops aren't any different than any cops any in the world. Go to the protests that took place in Europe. Take a look at the Dutch police taking down the Dutch protesters. Look what the French police did to the French protesters, what British police do to British protesters, what American police do to American protesters. And then we're going to sit here and nitpick because two Russian cops pick up a screaming Russian protester and throw him in a paddy wagon? I don't think so.
All right. Who was nitpicking? America's sweetheart was just simply asking a question. You
Yeah,
must have
but that's
somebody
the
else
point.
in.
Is that it's the kind of question. I mean, why pick on that? Why don't you show the video of all the guys peacefully going to the recruiting center?
Well, I prefaced it by saying we don't know what happened. So, I mean, on the other extreme would be ignoring it and just always assuming the police were in the right. So I think I was striking kind of a happy medium, striking a balance between the two considerations.
Well, I don't know. When your country is attacked by NATO and you're forced to mobilize people to respond to to an assault on your nation, I don't have too much sympathy for the protesters. That's just me speaking. I mean,
Okay. All right. Maurice from Iceland has a question. If Russia doesn't or can't roll the current NATO Ukrainian forces back in the next few weeks, how will they stop the huge force NATO is building to deploy in the coming spring offensive? Time isn't on Russia's side, says Maurice.
The huge force NATO is building to deploy in the coming spring. Where is it? Who's paid for it? Where are the troops coming from? Where are they going to be based? How much ammunition is being allocated for this force? How much fuel is being set aside? Is this really a combat capable force? Is this simply Jan Stoltenberg opening his mouth and going blah, blah, blah? And the same thing with Joe Biden, blah, blah, blah. There is no NATO force being assembled, not one worthy of the concept of a combat ready force. The other thing is, even if NATO were to assemble this force, it ain't going into Ukraine. Under what authority? Article 5, Russia hasn't attacked NATO. Article 4, you need unanimous consent. I don't imagine there's going to be a lot of people in NATO saying, yeah, that's a good idea. Why don't we invite Russia to send Kinzhal missiles to all of our capital cities and then follow up with nuclear weapons? So NATO is a joke, literally a joke. They're stripping, I mean, again, they've given all their weapons to Ukraine, and the Russians have complied by destroying those weapons. So this huge force that NATO's allegedly building up, with what? With what? Germany had to cannibalize the entire armored force to get one battalion sent to Lithuania. Now, Jan Stoltenberg said, I want you to turn it into a brigade. And the Germans are going, with what? They got nothing. They got to spend $100 billion to try and rebuild their military. That's not going to happen overnight. And do you really think the economy of Europe's going to be chugging on all cylinders this winter? I think they're going to be busy freezing to death as their industry shut down. Hell, they can't even make toilet paper right now. So those little prissy Germans who are so germophobic, good luck with that one, guys. You're going to have to learn how to use running water if it runs, because it's going to be pretty cold. Your pipes might freeze. I just don't see it. NATO, I'll tell you what, there's been no mobilization in NATO. There's been no funds allocated for this. It's all on paper. It's a PowerPoint presentation right now. There's nothing real attached to it. What is real is the fact that of the 210,000 soldiers that Russia deployed into the zone for the past 6 months, they've lost 6,000 dead. 6,000. Of the original 260,000 man army that Ukraine started with when this conflict almost 70,000 were dead, almost 50,000 were wounded. The Ukrainians have been gutted. The Russians haven't. The Russians are mobilizing 300,000 right now. They're initiating a process not only to rapidly assimilate 300,000 people who will probably be ready by the end of this year, early next year, but they're putting in practice a system that can be replicated that quick. So what? NATO wants to play the escalation game with Russia. Russia's already far ahead of NATO. Russia has an intact, combat-proven force ready to launch offensive military operations with sufficient ammunition and resources accrued, and they're getting ready to bring up 300,000 more. What is NATO doing? Blah, blah, blah. Not only blah, 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 but they're giving away all their weapons. We don't have HIMARS. That's supposed to be the big secret NATO weapon. That's what we're going to equalize because it's so accurate and wonderful. We just gave all the ammunition away to Ukraine, and it's all gone. They're blowing it up. The Russians, they're blowing up the thing. The Russians brought in these Iranian drones, and they're running rampant right now throughout Ukraine, blowing everything up. No, NATO is a joke, literally a joke. NATO's not doing anything. They talk a big talk. Let's look at this. Stoltenberg, sitting there talking very aggressive. Understand he's the Secretary General. You know how much command authority he has? Zero. He administers a bureaucracy. He gives no orders. He can give no orders. He has no authority. when it comes to military power, the people that have the authority are the military people, and within the NATO infrastructure, the military committee. You know what the military committee did the moment Putin announced mobilization? Immediately said, we don't want war with Russia. No. We don't want war with Russia. That's not what we want. No, we're just giving weapons to Ukrainians, but we don't want war with Russia. Every person with any intelligence in their head is recognizing right now that NATO is in a very difficult situation. They've politically committed to a course of action to empower Ukraine for the purpose of bleeding Russia white, to weaken Russia. And Russia's called their bluff. Russia said, you want to play that game? Boom, 300,000 men. Boom, we just created new Russia. Now let's go. NATO's going, we're not ready. We can't do it. We don't want to do it. We're done. I think you're going to see NATO backing, hitting the reverse. They won't totally back out because they're politically committed. But Ukraine is going to be left high and dry. And there it is, guys. You side with the United States, you pay the price. Ask the South Vietnamese, ask the Kurds, ask the Iraqis, ask the Afghans. How does it go to be an American ally? When was the last time an American ally actually won one of these conflicts? Well, it ain't going to be Ukraine.
All right, Maurice from Iceland, there you go. Your fellow Icelanders, what our favorite weapons inspector said. That's our first question, by the way, ever, I think, from Iceland. It would be nice if we get the entire world. How many nations there are in the world, Scott?
I mean, there's a number there, but it's not off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm not quizzing you. I don't know. This is actually just a question. All right. Somebody maybe can check on that. At some point, it would be great if we get entire globe. Here's Canada from Pavel. Please comment on the news about, please help me with the pronunciation, Scott.
Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Ooh, that's good. Recruiting prisoners. Oh, I put in an extra N there for Wagner.
Yeah, there was a video that went out on the internet that showed Mr. Prigozhin at a maximum security prison. That means these are hardcore convicts, giving them the speech and telling them that they had an opportunity to redeem their character, redeem their lives. They could volunteer to serve with Wagner as a contract soldier. And if they successfully completed that tour, their record would be wiped clean. They would be brought back into society. He reminded them that Wagner is not a defensive force. It's not there. It's not a vacation. It's an offensive assault-oriented force. He gave them the news that the last 60 convicts they brought in, and here's the important part. This isn't the first time it's happened. Wagner's been recruiting from these prisons for some time now. And he said, I forget, I think it was 60, but, a number of them died and a number of them were wounded. But he said they redeemed their lives. And so these are guys who are looking at hard time. They've committed serious crimes. There's no doubt about that. There are some limitations on the people that he would accept. But the bottom line is, he's giving them a chance. And everybody's like, oh my God, go back to the Vietnam War and take a look when the draft started. How many stories are of the guy that got drunk, got in a bar fight, and committed some crime, and he was going to jail, and the judge said, go to jail or go enlist. And they went and enlisted. Hey, this is a story as old as time. It's not an indication of anything other than, it's not desperation. Wagner's looking for, assault troops, and it's bloody business. Wagner's suffering casualties, and so they go to they go to the prisons and they recruit these guys. These are hard guys. They're going to fight, and that's what Wagner wants. And if they behave honorably on the field of battle, if they survive the conflict, then they get a second chance at life. I mean, that's just life. You could disagree. I'm not saying people have to agree with this. I'm just trying to put it into a perspective.
Oh, I hear a voicemail message coming in. This person wishes to remain anonymous. Okay, let's give it a listen.
You mentioned before that one of the reasons why Russia chose the SMO format over war with Ukraine was that big arrow wars result in big arrow casualties. Recently, however, you mentioned that Russia is taking unnecessary casualties conducting the SMO. Do I understand correctly that by unnecessary casualties you mean only casualties taken in order to protect civilian lives and infrastructure that Russia isn't obligated to protect under applicable law, but is protecting nevertheless, and not casualties resulting from having opted for the SMO format over war, because how could those casualties be unnecessary when the alternative is big arrow casualties? Could you further elaborate on both positions' opinions? Now, coming to the present, now that Russia is shifting away from the SMO format and moving towards a war, will the AFRF have to accept big arrow casualties, or will the fact that the entrenched, reinforced Ukrainian positions in the Donbass have been ground down allow the AFRF to fight a big arrow war without big arrow casualties, relying on firepower and therefore supremacy? And finally, if and only if the AFRF take big arrow casualties, will that in hindsight make the SMO somewhat pointless, or would there have been point to it still? Or was the SMO in any case the only format available to the Russian Federation back in February due to the political, economical, and social consequences of declaring war at that point?
Okay, let's start off by AFRF. I think he means Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. So we'll start off by clarifying that. Let's go back to the start. The special military operation is defined by the legal justification for the conflict. It's not war. Russia is carrying out preemptive collective self-defense of the Donbass. So any military action taken by the Russians has to be linked to eliminating an imminent threat to the collective security, and that doesn't include the Russian Federation. It's collective security of the newly independent republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. So that alone says that there's going to be limitations to what Russia can do. I thought they were going to go in harder than they did. They didn't. And one of the reasons is that they only allocated peacetime strength, 200,000 troops, and 200,000 troops is without and what we're learning with the way it's structured deployed. Remember, it's 200,000, but you have to secure land that you capture. So as you advance, there has to be troops. So you're bleeding off combat strength as you go, and you're going to take larger scale casualties. There's bigger risks, and 200,000 troops was not sufficient for big arrow war. So the Russians did the SMO. When I spoke about unnecessary casualties, I think I was talking about the fact that the Russians, in the conduct of this conflict to date, have bent over backwards to avoid civilian casualties. And when I say unnecessary, what I meant is casualties that were incurred because Russia is taking a far more lenient approach towards notions such as military necessity and proportionality. For instance, in the battle for Mariupol, urban warfare, Russian doctrine, just about the doctrine of let's go to Fallujah when the Marine Corps was fighting in Fallujah. Marines aren't war criminals. They're assiduous for the adherence to rule of law. But when we began the assault, there were civilian casualties. There were collateral damage because we made a determination that a given objective had a military necessity that required this much military force to be used, and that force was proportional to the need, and the civilian casualties were collateral damage. We saw that in Mosul when we were fighting ISIS. We literally leveled a city. We killed tens of thousands of civilians. Raqqa, we did the same thing. So, the United States has a history of preserving the lives of our soldiers, our Marines, at the expense of the enemy forces and any civilians that happen to get in the way. The Battle for Normandy, a historical example. We liberated France, but the Norman campaign, we killed 60,000 French civilians. We killed them through bombs, and things of that nature. Maverick is very unhappy with the number of casualties. It's very shocking, but it's true. So now we come to the Russians. The Battle of Mariupol. The Azov regiment literally put civilians in the basements of these buildings and then fortified the upper floors. Standard military tactics is you come in, you receive fire, you pull back, you eliminate the threat. You don't have to assault the building, you just take the building down. But the Russians didn't do that because there were civilians in the basement. And so the Russians decided, even though there was military necessity, it wasn't worth the proportionality. So they would literally sacrifice their lives to go in and get these civilians out. So they took what would normally be unnecessary casualties, because had they not bought into this expansive notion of the value of civilian life, they would have used a different tactic and they would not have suffered as many casualties as they did. So that's what I meant by that. Now as we move in, when Russia had 200,000 troops allocated, just remember that's just Russian troops. There's also the Donetsk militias, the Lugansk militias, there's Wagner, there's the Chechens, there's the National Guard, there's other forces there. But the troops that do hardcore offensive operations, it's 200,000. But you don't get to have 200,000, doing the operation, because you have to bleed off about 2/3 of that to, secure the rear areas, secure the border up above, north of Kharkiv. So the Russians weren't able to bring to bear at one point in one time sufficient force to do big aero war. That's why we got the little aero war. Now with 300,000 people coming in, you're going to see the rear area security, the border area taken up, and you're going to have 210,000 Russian troops who can be solely focused on doing big aero war, and they'll be able to bring to bear all of the resources that are necessary doctrinally to do the kind of operations that they're trained to do. And once they grind out, you're not going to use big arrow against the dug-in forces and Donbass. You're still going to have to clear that, and that's what Wagner's doing right now. They're assaulting these defensive positions. They're grinding their way through. But once you get through that defensive belt, and now you're moving into open terrain, the Russians are going to bring to bear some of the best trained, most combat-hardened forces in the world against the Ukrainian army that's been gutted. The troops that are now coming in with the NATO equipment aren't their best and brightest. Their best and brightest are in the ground, in the hospital. These are, forces that are poorly trained, poorly motivated. They might be well equipped, but how well equipped can you be if you can't maintain the equipment? You might have a great, shiny new Western tank, but if it's going to break down and you can't maintain it, it's a piece of junk. So I think the Russians are going to be able to apply big aero war type military. Maverick doesn't like big arrows, but big arrow type military operations against the Ukrainian military is going to be ill positioned to handle that. So I honestly believe that come late winter, before the spring thaw, you're going to see a significant Russian advance that is focused on the destruction of the Ukrainian military, sort of the final battle.
And he's dangling this nuclear threat again.
Okay, Michael from Winnipeg, Canada. Many analysts are predicting Russia will take control of Odessa sometime in the near future. Based on what happened in Mariupol, will taking Odessa be a bloodbath?
Could be. Anytime you have urban combat, it's very bloody. The question is, are there Ukrainian forces at that point in time that are willing to fight and die? Mariupol was home of the Azov regiment, of these ultra-nationalists, these neo-Nazis, these fanatics. I'm sure there's nationalist units in Odessa, but are they there in sufficient numbers to mount that kind of fanatical defense? But no, Russia, I believe that this conflict won't end until Russia, at a minimum, absorbs Odessa and absorbs Kharkov to complete the annexation of Novorossiya in totality. So they haven't done that yet because they don't have sufficient forces to take and hold Odessa and Kharkov. But they will come spring. And when that happens, that's what's going to happen. But
Right. Red Deep says that's a
urban,
good
urban
question.
urban warfare is tough. Odessa is, that could be a tough fight. Kharkov could be a tough fight. Both cities have to fall. But I honestly believe that the Russians are going to degrade Ukraine's not just capabilities to defend, but their willingness to defend. I think Russia, you'll see, is going to break the spirit of Ukraine, that Ukraine is going to be a broken nation populated by a broken people who aren't going to be willing to carry out this kind of defense in the long term.
Konstantinos from Greece, well, that surely sounds like a Greek name, asks the following. Has Erdogan decided to break away from NATO? If so, could that mean that a war between Greece and Turkey could break out soon?
Well, I don't think Erdogan has decided to break away from NATO yet. I mean, he's definitely gravitating in that direction, but that's a decisive split, and he would lose too much leverage right now. I mean, right now, I think Erdogan's enjoying playing the role of spoiler. Finland and Sweden don't become NATO members because of Erdogan. If he leaves NATO, then he loses that leverage. Right now, he gets to have a veto on just about anything NATO does, and he likes that because it allows him to play the role of peacemaker. Look at him; he's running around, he's sticking his nose in everything. He gets that because he's straddling both Europe and Asia, Eurasia. So no, I don't think he's going to leave me now. But now we come to the question of a war between Greece and Turkey. Turkey doesn't have to leave NATO to fight Greece. Turkey will fight Greece at the drop of a hat, and that's a real risk right now. Is that there's a dispute right now about islands off the coast of Greece. The waters around these islands potentially have some very valuable oil and gas fields that can be exploited. At the end of World War I, Greece took control of these islands, and they also took control of some of these islands that were occupied by the Italians during World War II. But one of the conditions of Greece taking control is that they wouldn't militarize the islands. And right now, it looks like Greece has militarized some of these islands, and Turkey says because they violated that clause, they no longer get the islands. That you have to buy into both things, receiving the islands and agreeing not to militarize. And by militarizing them, you make null and void your possession of those islands. And so Turkey says they belong to us. They revert back to Ottoman control, and we are the modern day version of the Ottoman Empire. The Greeks say, no, they're two separate things. The islands belong to us, and if you have a problem with us militarizing them, that's a separate issue. The president of Turkey went straight out, and he went all Smyrna on them. And anybody who studies history knows that Smyrna is the modern day is Izmir. Smyrna is a Greek city. It was a Greek city. And in 1922, the Turkish forces came in and drove 200,000 Greeks into the sea, literally drove them into the sea, set the city on fire, and just pushed them all into the ocean. Many of them died. Many of them burned to death. Some were able to swim to ships. A lot of them swam in the ocean and drowned. And he said, we'll do it again. So, there's a lot of really dangerous rhetoric going on. And what makes us even more interested isn't just that Greece and Turkey might go to war. France has said that if Turkey goes to war against Greece, that France will join the Greeks against the Turks. So we're going to have this intramural firefight among NATO members. And it's not just Turkey and Greece that are doing this. Germany and Poland are getting pretty interesting there. Where Poland says, "Hey, Germany, we're going back to the crimes you committed during World War II. You owe us, $1 trillion in reparations." And the Germans are saying, "Really? You want to play the scratch the scab game? We can do that too. All those former German territories, Silesia, that you took over, that were gifted to you, we'd like them back." And so the Germans and the Poles are starting. So I come back to one of the things I talked about earlier. Is it really a good idea to let Germany spend $100 billion to rebuild a military that will then pivot east and go through Poland to fight the Russians? Haven't we done this before historically? Wasn't that a bad idea then? One would imagine that it's a bad idea today.
Anna from now, you've lived in Russia and you've seen that people in Russia are not devils with horns. We are ordinary people. Why do you think every 100 years someone unites and tries to destroy us?
Because we don't like you. I don't know. I mean, because we don't understand you. You're not Europe. I mean, you know, Peter the Great tried to make you Europe. He built St. Petersburg to be a window in Europe. He invited French scholars and German diplomats to incorporate themselves into the Russian court. Russia's bent over backwards to be, you know, receptive to Europe. But you have this huge expanse that goes into Asia. And Europe doesn't understand that. Europe doesn't understand your history, doesn't understand your culture, doesn't understand your religion. And they're afraid of you. They fear you. They view you as an outsider. You're never going to be a member of the European club. So yeah, they jump up and come at you. Napoleon did it. He paid the ultimate price. The Germans did it twice. They paid the price. And NATO's trying to do it today, and they're going to pay the price. You know, but look, the history of Russia is a wonderful history, but it's a tragic history when it comes to Russia's interface with Europe and the West. You know, when you take a look at the Tsarist Russia and the collapse of Tsarist Russia, what happened afterwards, you know, people talk about the Russian Civil War. People talk about things like it wasn't the Russian Civil War. It was the entire world against Russia, against the new Soviet entity, against the Bolsheviks. You know, America, how many Americans know that we invaded Russia? We sent troops into Vladivostok. We sent troops into Murmansk, along with the British, along with the Japanese. There was a Czech Legion working on behalf of the Western powers. The French were involved down in the Donbass region. We invaded Russia. The British were coming in through the Caspian Sea. We invaded Russia. And then we put the equivalent of the modern day sanctions. We've been sanctioning Russia from the very beginning, not doing business with them. We've been plotting against Russia. So, you know, you can't but have sympathy for anybody in Russia who says, we feel like the West doesn't like us. Go ahead. The West doesn't like you because the West fears you because they don't understand you. This is one of the reasons why I'm a big proponent of Russian area studies. I just think the more Americans learn about Russia, the more they understand. As she said, it becomes clear that the Russians don't have horns. They don't have a tail. They're not the devil. They're human beings just like we are. They're extraordinarily well educated. They're extraordinarily well cultured. You know, this isn't a, you know, these aren't Cossacks on the frontier ripping their food apart with their hands. These are cultured people who have a better appreciation for the arts and things than many people in the West. But we don't want to recognize that. We don't want to appreciate that. I mean, one of the biggest eye-opening things for me when I went to the Soviet Union, it wasn't, I mean, it was Russian, you know, the Russian Federation or Russian Republic at the time, but the Soviet Union, you know, having studied it in college and pretty much my entire life, was that recognition. I just didn't know what to expect from the Soviet people. I expected sort of a brainwashed bunch of robots running around just saying, you know, tak tochna to anything that came out of Moscow. And what I found is just like us, they want the same things we want. They love their family just like we love our families. They, you know, they cry, they laugh, they get angry, they, you know, they the same range of emotions. They're human beings just like we are. And if we learn to treat them like human beings and learn to respect their society and learn to respect their culture, the Russians don't inherently want to march west. It's not like Russia wanted to go to Paris in 1814. The Russians didn't wake up when they go, let's just start marching to Paris. Napoleon came to them first, burned Moscow to the ground. Well, actually, the Russians did not. So they didn't say, you know, 1940, we want to go to Berlin. No. The Nazis again marched to Moscow. got stopped short of the gates, went to Stalingrad, big war, 27 million dead. The Russians took Berlin. And today, the Russians didn't start, this fight saying we want to bring back Novorossiya. Russia has been, especially Vladimir Putin, has been articulating against that very concept. While he says historically Novorossiya is part of the Russian nation, he recognized after 1992 the reality that Ukraine was a sovereign state. He doesn't like the history of Ukraine. He views it as an artificial construct. He thinks that it was wrong the way lands were attached to it. But he said it is a state that has territorial integrity that has to be respected. And how do we know he meant it? Because if he didn't mean it in 2014, he could have accepted the referendum in the Donbass where they voted to get the troops or voted to join Russia. But he didn't. He said, no, you're part of Ukraine. We have to respect that. It's not until NATO intervened in a way that threatened the security of Russia that Russia said, okay, we have to resolve the situation. And the only way this situation is going to be resolved is to incorporate Novorossiya, the Russian nation, into the Russian Federation. But it's not as though Putin woke up one day and said, I have an itch. I think I just need to go out and get Novorossiya. It didn't work that way. Everything Russia does in response to the West is because they were first provoked by the West, provoked by the French, provoked by the Germans, currently provoked by NATO. That's just the way it does. Somebody keeps throwing up a question about Transnistria, so I'm going to answer it right now. Transnistria is a byproduct of the former Soviet Union, of the Cold War. Moldova used to be a Soviet republic, and in Moldova, along the Dniester River, you had a buildup of Russian military forces, a very large ammunition dump. Ask yourself why there's so much ammunition for the Russians to use, because they historically have built these massive ammunition dumps around the country to support the big Soviet army. One of the largest ammunition dumps in the world today is in Transnistria, and there was an army, could be getting the number wrong, either the 40th Army or 42nd Army, 40th I think it is, that was there protecting it. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the 40th Army and their families, because when the army garrisons something, their families are there. And so there's a significant Russian population. And they said, we ain't joining Moldova. That's not going to happen. So they declared an independent republic, Transnistria. There's a mixed population there. There's Moldovans, there's Romanians, there's Russians, but they all call themselves the Transnistria Republic. They don't want to be part of Moldova. And I believe in the near future, they're going to be given the opportunity to join the Russian motherland. And I'll bet you a dime to a dollar that when they have that referendum, they're all going to say, we want to be part of Russia, and they're going to join Russia. They're going to be incorporated into Russia because, frankly speaking, they are Russia. They're not Moldova. They have nothing in common with Moldova. They don't want to be part of Moldova. They're not Romanian. They're not Ukrainian. They view themselves to be as part of Russia. And people say, well, wait a minute. It's not a complete Russian population. How does that work? Guys, if you think you have to be Russian to be a member of the Russian homeland, the Russian Federation, you don't know anything about Russian history. Russia is the Russian Federation has, I forget the number, but at 27, 30, or even more than that, different ethnicities, languages. The Chechens. You think the Chechens are Russian? No, they're Chechens. They're proud to be in Chechens, but they're also proud to be part of the Russian Federation. Same with the people from Dagestan, the English people, the Kalmuks, the Udmurts, the Tatars, the Bashkirs. We can go on and on and on. All these people are separate ethnicities, but they're part of the Russian Federation, part of the Russian nation. We're talking about people, regardless of ethnicity, that are united by common history, common culture, common language. And Transnistria is part of the Russian nation. I mean, Persian's right. He's only about a third Russian, but it doesn't matter ethnically because the Russian nation you don't have to be Russian. You just have to identify with the historical, cultural, linguistic, religious notions that define the Russian nation. And Vladimir Putin has, from the very beginning, said that he is, and Russia needs to be, the Russian Federation needs to be the defender of the Russian nation. The Russian nation is Novorossiya in Ukraine, even though it's, Ukraine as a nation, it's the Russian nation. I'll tell you what, for the people in the Baltics, you got some Russian nation in you as well. So be careful how you treat them. Mother Russia's angry.
By the way, my ancestors are from Russia, and I've never felt particularly connected to Russia. It hasn't been the opposite, but it's just something that I haven't thought about that much. But this experience of doing this podcast with you has kind of a feeling of, oh, maybe I should get in touch with those roots, because I've been feeling nothing but warmth from Russian people.
It's a facade, Jeff. They're all trained by the KGB. Don't you know that? They're all trained by the KGB. This is a reverse honey trap being run on you. They're luring you in. Trust me. When you get there, the horns come out, the tails come out. In there, I had to run away. No, Jeff, they're wonderful people. Really, one of the things that frustrates me and angers me, and I don't want to promote the book too much, but
okay.
Disarming the Time of Perestroika. We had horrible. Thank you. Put it cover. We had horrible relations with the Soviet Union, with the Russians in the 1980s, and then we broke the code. We implemented this treaty that literally brought these warring nations together in common cause for peace. And there's no one who was participating in that in 1990, 1991, who didn't believe we were moving in the direction of long-term peace and stability, cooperation between nations. Almost immediately, once this was Ronald Reagan's baby. That's why he's on the cover right there, Uncle Ronnie, signing the treaty, Mr. Evil Empire, Mr. I am dyed-in-the-wool conservative. I will never, ever, ever support these evil dudes. And he turned on it. He said, no, we don't want nuclear war. And he used that rejection of nuclear war to begin a process where in June 1988, he was in Moscow talking to Soviet students, and somebody asked him, do you still view us as the evil empire? He said, no, those days, that's the past. I view you as friends. And then what happened? George Herbert Walker Bush came in and started to hit the pause button, slow things down. And I talk about in the book about, how, Gorbachev had gone all in on perestroika, and it never really took root. Yeltsin was trying to undermine him. And then Gorbachev turned to the United States and said, hey, I could use a little help here because I'm trying to make peace. Why don't you, sign some more treaties for me and start bringing in some of this economic aid to help us out? And Bush went, wait, got to think about this. Got to have my guys study this, because he was of the school of thought that said, the weaker the Soviet Union is, the better it is for us. And right now we have the Soviet Union collapsing in front of our eyes. Maybe it's not a good idea to try and help bring them up. That's the exact opposite direction than that the INF treaty started us on. And ever since Bush hit the pause button, then it was followed by Clinton, who was all about the economic rape of Russia. I'd hate to use that kind of word, but that's what it was. It's not exploitation. It literally was the rape of Russia, Russian economy by the United States, by the West. And it was the political neutering, castration of Russia by letting somebody like Yeltsin in. You say, well, wait a minute, wasn't Yeltsin elected? He's not a democratically elected president. He was sustained by us. The 1996 election, re-election of Yeltsin was bought by America. Everybody screams, hey, the Russians, they stole that 2016 election. No, they didn't. We know they didn't. We know that was all a farce. We know the Steele dossier was manufactured crap. We know that, what they're talking about, the hacking of the DNC was made up by, Bobby Mook. It's garbage. The FBI manufactured the case against Trump. It didn't happen. But what we do know it happened is in 1996, we bought an election. We bought Boris Yeltsin. We owned Boris Yeltsin. That's what we wanted. We wanted a weak Russia. And it's been going that way ever since. One of these days, this war is going to end. And we got to get an off-ramp off. And I really think we should talk about, how we can go back in time and recreate the conditions of the original INF treaty, get us back on the path of cooperating for the mutual benefit of both nations, that can lead to maybe not friends, because I tell you what, the Russians have no I can't blame the Russians if they say we don't want to be friends with you anymore. I don't blame them.
Well, just right at the right that I'm warming up to getting in touch with my roots. Come on, no, not now.
But I mean, that's what we need. I think what we need, and I think you and I have talked about this, that one of our long-term goals is to find a way. We know our government sucks right now. We know the American government sucks, and we know that the American establishment, the political and economic elite here in the United States suck, because they don't want to deal with Russia as equals, with Russia as a fellow member. That they want Russia depressed. They want to exploit Russia's energy for our sole benefit, things of that nature. But there is this thing called the American people, and the more we can promote citizen to citizen dialogue, citizen to citizen contact, that's empowering, because the more you get the American people educated about the reality of Russia, the less likely they'll be inclined to vote for people who are promulgating policies that speak of Russia in the exact opposite light. People start asking questions like Donald Trump did. The big question: why can't we be friends? What's wrong with being friends with Russia? I mean, again, I'm not saying you have to buy into Donald Trump, but it's a hell of a good question. A hell of a good question. And the Democrats and the Republicans that are against it have never come up with a good answer.
Well, I absolutely want to do whatever we can in that regard, but we're up against a lot, and that's why I was highlighting those bratty reporters, because they're carrying on more, like I said, more like school teachers scolding people, and that attitude is what permeates the consciousness, and it's basically brainwashing. So it's tough to overcome it. I'm not saying we can't or we shouldn't, but it is tough. Anna from Poland. My brother is an intelligence officer in a rank of major within NATO. He says he saw bodies lying along the streets in Bucha when Russians were still there. Is it possible that data in his rank are manipulated?
Well, I'm just going to assume that if he's your brother and you're from Poland, he's a Polish major. And first question I have is, what the hell is he doing in Bucha? But if he's, I'm assuming that he looked at imagery, or he was looking at videotapes, he was looking at some sort of remote data. Look, we know that the Ukrainians shelled Bucha extensively. And how do we know this? Because the Ukrainians provided the data for us. They brought out the flechettes. I don't know how many people have seen that. The Ukrainians, look, the flechettes. Well, thank you, Ukraine. Guess what? Who was the only force using 120 millimeter artillery rounds capable of firing the flechette round at that time? Ukraine. Russia used 152 millimeter shells. They don't have any flechette rounds. So if you have a flechette in a body in Bucha, Ukrainians did it. It was Ukrainian artillery coming in on the Russian positions in Bucha that were inflicting a lot of casualties. So if you saw casualties on the road, you were seeing bodies that were produced from Ukrainian shelling. But the bodies that were put out and displayed to the world were bodies that were more recently killed after the Russians pulled out. I'm not saying that nobody died while the Russians were there. Clearly they were died while they were there. But they were killed by Ukrainian shelling. The Russians aren't in the business of killing Ukrainian civilians haphazardly. Is it possible that Russians have killed civilians? Yeah, we know they have. Is it possible that some Russians killed civilians with malice? Of course it is. This is war. Humans break down, they do things they shouldn't do. But organizationally, systemically, Russia's not in the business of killing Ukrainian civilians, just the opposite. They're in the business of sacrificing their lives to save Ukrainian civilians. And as the Russians withdrew, some of those Ukrainian civilians were trying to withdraw with them. That's why they had the white armband to say, hey, we're with you, we're coming with you. These are the guys who were carrying the ration packs, those green boxes with the Russian humanitarian food that was used to feed the civilians. I mean, think about it. If you're in the business of killing the civilians, why do you feed them? But they had that. And these were the guys that were moving as the Ukrainian security forces came in. You know, the ones that said, we're going to carry out a cleansing operation. The ones where the civilian, the female member of the local committee told the people, stay indoors. The security services are going to be carrying out cleansing operations. Don't be afraid. Be afraid of what? The gunfire that you're hearing? The gunfire that's doing what? Scaring people or killing people? Oh, we know because we have the boatsman. He's a infamous murderous thug that works for Azov. He's on tape telling his guys, they say, look, that he doesn't have the blue armband. Can we kill him? He said, shoot him, shoot him. So if you didn't have the blue armband, you got shot. And so, those bodies that you saw there, the freshly killed bodies, the ones who died after the Russians left, were murdered by Ukrainian security forces using the same tactics that they're using in Kharkov right now. Right now, so, anybody who's deemed a collaborator is being pulled out of their house, executed on the spot, or put in trucks taken off to the woods, shot the way that the Nazis used to kill the Jews in World War II. So that's the thing. I mean, I'm not going to accuse the lady's brother of anything. I think he may have saw. Look, I was an intelligence officer. You look at a photograph, and there's a lot of interpretation that goes along with it. And so, depending on the data you're receiving or the spin that your leaders want, is how you interpret that data. But I think looking at the full spectrum of data available, there's no way in hell that the bodies you saw in Bucha were a result of Russians trying to kill Ukrainians. They're 100% certainty they're involved. They were put there by Ukrainians killing anybody accused of collaborating with Russia.
All right, now comes another voicemail. Thank you for the $4.20 tip. That must be somebody who enjoys that particular figure. Here's a voicemail message from somebody named Andre.
I got your joke, Jeff.
Hi everyone. So my question to Scott was always on top of every answer he gave, at least for me. Now the SMO will be linked to Russia monthly. So why USA cannot take part in this rally and give Ukraine another full rights membership? As I remember, Scott, you told that Russia cannot win NATO that has 3 to 5 million troops available. So is this fighting against Ukraine as not a member would initiate full alliance legitimate military support and pull back Russia?
Help me, Jeff.
You couldn't understand what he.
I think I did, but I'm not 100% certain. I think that the question is, why can't NATO make Ukraine a member of NATO and therefore help Ukraine push back the Russians?
All right, let's pretend that was his question.
Okay, Andre, I apologize. I'm hard of hearing, and I didn't catch all that. But
I have an idea, Andre. If you're listening, give it to us in text, and we'll put it on. Tori, look out for Andre. Just identify yourself.
Yeah, I'd like that rather than me go off and try to answer something that I'm not 100% sure was the question. I think that's Jeff. You're rehired. You got your job back.
All right. What a hot date we're having. Next question comes from Denver, Colorado. Matt C. I talked to Matt C. this week, behind the scenes. Nice man. Thanks for your help, Matt. How do you think the winter will affect the U.S. economy, considering Brandon has drawn down America's strategic oil reserve to the lowest it's been in decades? Will oil production increase, or are we facing a hard winter?
Well, first of all, Jeff, I object to the use of Brandon. You've politicized this broadcast, and I find that to be unacceptable. So anybody who's operating the YouTube algorithm, understand that was an anomaly. It will never happen again. Don't close down this this channel.
Am I fired again?
You're fired. Tori. No. I don't think the United States is we don't have the same energy crisis that Europe has. We're self-sufficient in energy. Even though one of the problems is our refineries in the Gulf Coast are geared towards a specific grade of crude that only comes from Venezuela, which used to be one of the primary suppliers of oil, but we've ruined that. So then we went ahead and bought it from Russia, because in the Ural Mountains there's an area that produces a grade of oil that nearly perfectly replicates the structures of the Venezuelan oil, so it can be brought into these refineries without any need to retool the refineries. The breaking down of the oil into its very constituent parts and all this. If we had to swap out from Russian oil, we'd have to shut these refineries down for a significant period of time at great expense. And these refineries produce gasoline. And so Americans would be running around going, we ain't got no gas. That would be a problem. Now ask yourself the following question. Why is it if we're not getting oil from Venezuela and we say we're not getting oil from Russia, are the refineries still working? Oh, good question. How could that happen? Could it be that India is buying the Russian oil and then reselling it to us at a marked up price so that we can keep the refineries running? Bing, there's your answer, guys. So Joe Biden is a lying sack of manure when he says that we will not buy Russian oil. We're buying Russian oil. We're just buying it from the Indians at a marked up price. Hypocrisy knows no bounds. But what we also seen is that Biden has attempted to offset the global uncertainty and global instability in the energy market brought on by, Europe's suicidal decision to cut themselves off from Russian energy. So to offset that, to prevent that from spilling over, and we all remember the gas prices spiking, he's released oil from the strategic reserve in an effort to bring down the pressure. Well, he did. I remember when the prices started to spike, I actually took photographs of it back when I was a Twitter person, and I posted on Twitter. And I think I was there. I filled my gas tank up at the last time the gas was $4.19. As I went to go pay for the gas, the dude was jacking the price up to $4.39. I went, holy cow. Then he turned around a few days later and it went to $4.59 and then to $4.89. I think right now it's about the $4.80 mark. And everybody's like, that's really great. Gas prices have come down. You listen to CNN, MSNBC, they're all, gas prices have come down. No, they're still unacceptably high. I remember when they were $4.19, and it should be in the $3. I remember when it was in $2. It wasn't that long ago. No, Joe Biden's energy policies suck, and we're paying more to pump for that. We've done some artificial things to keep the price managed. We're not going to have an energy crisis this winter. I think people's bills are going to go up. I think, be ready for that. I think people are already seeing, their gas bills are going to be going up. If you're doing bunker oil, it's going to go up. We're going to be paying more at the gas station, but it will still be relatively affordable. And it ain't going to be $10 a gallon like in the UK, I hope, because that would be a big problem for most Americans. People will stop driving if you have to pay that much money for gas because they can't afford it. Most Americans are running on razor thin margins in their personal economies. They've already maxed out their earning capacity with husbands and wives working 1, 2, 3 jobs just to get enough money to survive. And if you start jacking the energy price up, remember, it's not just the price you're paying at the pump or the price you're paying for energy. It translates to everything. We went shopping and Marina and I went shopping and we're just looking at the price of food. We're looking at the bill. We can't believe it. You go there and you fill up your shopping cart and you pull in there and it's like you're being robbed. You're going, oh my God, this would have cost us, $120, a couple months ago. And we're paying, $230, $240 for the same stuff. You can't afford that, but that's what's going to happen here. Prices are going to go up. Transportation costs are going to go up. Everything's going to go up, and it's just going to be, it's not going to be that we're not going to have anything at this point in time this winter. I think we'll have it, but it's going to cost us a lot more money. And then you have to ask yourself, do we really want to start a sanctions-based conflict with China? Because then what happens is everything costs way more, and we don't have anything. Remember, in the pandemic, when we had the supply chain disruption, and suddenly the shelves were bare. The critical things, the Germans are going to have to write a book for us because, remember, we ran out of toilet paper. Everyone was very concerned about how are we going to do what you need to do with toilet paper. Germany's already running out of toilet paper. That could be the future for us if we start playing, this energy game combined with disruption of supply chains, then things can get discomfortable or uncomfortable. I think next summer is going to be more problematic for us than this winter. I think we're going to make it through this winter with relative comfort, but this might be the last Christmas that's actually going to be an enjoyable Christmas for a long time.
All right. First of all, I think Germany has bidets, and in keeping in that theme that you refer to Biden as a lying sack of manure, which is certainly much more respectful than calling him Brandon.
Right.
I got hairy legs that turn
Don't you?
that turn blonde in the sun,
All right.
and I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Okay.
Don't
That's
do
our
that,
president. That's our president. Thomas Przytula, Poland. Are you aware that you weren't really, when he says you, I think he means one, isn't really discharged from the military until one has resigned one's commission? Is that true? I don't know where that question's coming from left field. Does that make any sense to you?
No, it does. I think what he's trying to say is that, let's say first of all, no, you can resign from active duty. I resigned from active duty. I submitted a letter of resignation. They accepted it, and I left. But I still retained my rank. I was still a member of the individual ready reserve, and I think that's what he's implying is that you incur a lifelong, especially as a commissioned officer, a lifelong responsibility or debt to society. And if they want to recall you, they can recall you. I mean, I'm 61. The max age is 65. So in theory, if the United States went into, a major conflict, they could pick up the phone and say, Ritter, you're back. Come on back. We own you. And that's absolutely true. But that, will only happen in an extreme circumstance. It's and most of the time, if you've walked away from the military and you opted out of active participation in individual ready reserve or active participation in the organized reserve, unless you have the single most unique skill set in the history of skill sets, they're not going to reach out and touch you because if you don't play in the military, you're not very good at being reintegrated in the military. And so, I understand where he's coming from, and he's 100% right. Once you have a commission, the government can always come back and get you. They can recall you to active duty at any time, but as long as you're within the age range. But I'm not worried about it right now. I don't think the U.S. government's going to be calling me to active duty anytime soon.
All right. Thanks to Mark Musumhe from the Czech Republic. I got to get that right. For 200, whatever that is in Czech dollars. So what does that come out to in American currency? I'm hoping it's at least $5,000. Thanks for that tip. And the rest of you, please be inspired by that. Now we go to Australia. Our global audience is so diverse. Jeff Maddox, who misspells my name. I don't like that, but whatever. Here comes the question from Geoff. How credible are Peter Zeihan's claims? He says China is screwed as global trade becomes insecure, with 85% of its inputs being sourced abroad, including energy, food, and industrial, and Russia cannot maintain its energy basin.
Russia can maintain its energy basin. So right off the bat, Peter Zeihan's premise is fundamentally flawed. He says 85% of its. Go put the question back up. I was trying to read, make sure I'm precise with it.
Tori, you got to change the layout.
There you go. The global trade, because with 85% of its inputs being sourced abroad. You want to know why 85% of its inputs are sourced abroad? Because China has reached out and created a new Silk Road. China built it. China has those relationships. Those are secure relationships. Global trade doesn't become insecure for China. Global trade becomes insecure for those nations that haven't replicated China's efforts. United States, Australia, Europe. They're the ones that have insecure global trade. China has nothing insecure about its global trade. China has been thoroughly integrating. China dominates global trade. China dominates the global supply chain. So, anytime you have economic disruption, China, every nation is going to pay a price. But the notion that China is screwed, no. Australia is screwed. Australia stands no chance. I don't know if Jeff's from Australia. He says he is. Go take a look at your trade relation with China, and tell me who's on top, who's on bottom. It ain't Australia on top. If the Chinese wanted to shut down the Australian economy, they could do it like that. And that's what's going to happen when there's global trade disruption, especially if it's disruption brought about by any conflict between China and the West. Australia, are you proud of being part of, AUKUS? Hey, nice buy-in. It's screwed you, man. You guys are screwed. If AUKUS ever becomes operationalized, AUKUS, of course, being the Australia, United Kingdom, U.S. little mini coalition, created for the sole purpose of giving Australia nuclear submarines, which they don't need. Legally probably can't have because of the non-proliferation treaty. It doesn't matter. Australia gets submarines. They sacrifice their entire economy for that. China will shut you down. End of story. You're going to rely on the U.S. fleet to protect you, on the Australian fleet to protect you. I don't mean to be too, mean here, but come on. You guys don't have a military worthy of the name. You can't project power in a meaningful fashion outside of your island unless you have the United States doing the heavy lifting for you. And the United States would probably, any conflict with China, be tied up in Taiwan with insufficient resources because we've locked ourselves into Europe, into confronting Russia, and we're locked into South Korea, and we're locked into Japan. Australia is sort of going to be like in the back in terms of our priorities. And you're screwed. China's not screwed. China has this thing figured out. It reminds me of people who said that Russia was going to get screwed with these energy sanctions. Russia. Think about it. If you're going to call a nation a gas station pretending to be a nation, at least respect the fact that they're a goddamn gas station, meaning that they know about energy. They know something about how global energy works. And guess one of the reasons why this has gone so bad for Europe? Because Russia has outmaneuvered the United States and Europe every step of the way, because Russia does energy better than anybody else does energy. They do it better than the Saudi Arabians do energy. Russia understands how global energy markets work. Russia understands its role. Russia understands how if you shut us off here, we open up here, and Russia's doing A-OK. You know who understands global supply chains? China. China does it better than anybody else. So let's not pretend that some Western analyst who, I don't know what the basis of the guy, but China does it better. If you think you're going to do it better in China and you want to get into a global supply chain disruption contest with China, you're going to lose every single time. Just like if you want to get into a global energy security confrontation with Russia, you're going to lose every single time. Russia does energy better than the West. China does supply chains better than the West.
All right. Well, what do you expect from a nation that spells Jeff with a G? That's just crazy.
Well, the British do that too.
Oh, they do? Well, at least the British have a real British accent. What's up with the Australian accent? It's not even
come
British.
now.
All right, I'm kidding.
I like Australia.
Me too. Not as much as Russia, though. My new favorite country. Hans
FBI is listening.
Hans Sausageburger from Beijing.
I'm sure you mispronounced that, but that's okay.
Yeah. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Saoseng.
Oh, Saoseng. Look at you with that authoritative pronunciation. Not bad. What do you think is Turkey's game in its support for Azerbaijan? I think I pronounced that correctly. Is it acting on behalf of NATO, stabbing Russia in the back? Supplying drones to Kiev should have been enough of poking Russia.
Well, remember, Turkey's been in the drone game long before the Ukrainian conflict. Turkey provided drones to Libya, and those drones were used to attack pro-Russian forces in Libya. Turkey operated drones in Syria, and those drones were used to good effect against Russian allies in Syria. Turkey is selling drones to Ukraine. It hasn't. Russia's a mature nation. Russia's not a child. They're not going to throw a temper tantrum every time somebody acts in their sovereign interests. Turkey is a NATO member that also came out and said that NATO is responsible for the conflict in Ukraine. So there's trade-offs. What's Turkey's game with Azerbaijan? It certainly predates the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. The Ottoman Empire views the Azeri Turks as part of the Turkish nation. They viewed it that way. At the end of World War One, of course, Western history always has the Turkish army being devastated by the Brits in Mesopotamia and in Palestine. What they never talk about is the fact that the Turks actually launched a major offensive in the east that captured, Azerbaijan, captured Georgia, captured Armenia, drove in there, and it was stopped only by the surrender of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the war. But the Turks were launching major offensives, were very successful, and one of those offensives was designed to join Turkey with Azerbaijan, create common cause between the two, and it didn't work. Eventually, the Turks had to withdraw, and Azerbaijan became an independent republic within the construct of the Soviet Union. But Turkey and Azerbaijan have had very close relations from that time, and the Turks also have very historically bad relations with the Armenians. So the notion that Turkey just woke up one day and said, we're going to help Azerbaijan against Armenia is ludicrous. The 1993 conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan resulted in a decisive Armenian victory that saw up to 20% of of Azerbaijani territory occupied by Armenia. And when the Armenians decided that Minsk is a funny city because there's a lot of Minsk Accords. There's a Minsk Accord going on to try a Minsk peace process to try and resolve the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. And when it became clear that Armenia had no intention of honoring any aspect of this Minsk process, the Azerbaijanis turned to the Turks and said, can you help us out? And the Turks provided significant military assistance, including these drones, and they empowered the Azeris to crush the Armenian army and recapture much of the lost territory. And again, this predates the current Russian-Ukrainian conflict. So when we see, Armenia, once again, Armenia has a problem. It's because they have a government that recognizes they just got their butts kicked and that there's not much they can do to prevent that from happening again. But they have a population that's furious at the government for giving up and surrendering. The thing that started the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict is this enclave called Nagorno-Karabakh. It's within the territory of Azerbaijan. It's Azeri territory, but it's populated by Armenians. And it was the decision of the Armenian population to declare independence from Azerbaijan and to link up with Armenia that started the first Armenian-Azeri conflict. It was the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and that led to the Armenian forces driving Azerbaijan back, taking 20% of the territory, linking Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh. The surrender that just took place a couple of years ago when the Armenians were defeated, the Armenian government had to concede that Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijan, and part of the peace process is therefore how do you get the rights of the Armenian people in Nagorno-Karabakh to be protected when they're governed by the Azeri government. So that the Armenian government's been trying to engage in this negotiation, but they keep having people storm the parliament in anger and beat people up and protest because they just view this as a betrayal of Greater Armenia, betrayal of the Armenian people. And it's this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde aspect of Armenia that is led to much of this current fight. And I'm not saying the Azerbaijanis are innocent. They're not. The Azeris are very aggressive. They still want to, the Armenians were supposed to do certain things in terms of withdrawing and agreeing to, helping facilitate a land corridor and between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, things they aren't doing. And I think the Azeris just got fed up and they started to be more and more aggressive, and Turkey's on their side. But this isn't about Turkey stabbing Russia in the back. This is about, age-old animosities between Turkey and Armenia that predate the current relationship between Turkey and Russia.
Jorgen Hassel of Sweden. Piecing together some official statistics, I came to the conclusion that the Swedish military has about 5,000 soldiers and sailors. Could that be the reason the Russians don't seem very upset with us for joining NATO?
That could be one reason.
This sounds like something you would say.
Only in my most impolitic moment. One of the key aspects about Sweden is that it doesn't share a common border with Russia. So, Russia, if NATO expanded into Sweden, it's not the same as NATO going into Finland. That's the problem. And Sweden and Finland together creates strategic depth for Finland. So it's a collective problem for Russia. But the biggest problem Russia faces with this NATO expansion in the Nordic area is Finland, because Finland has an extensive border, and that would put NATO right up against the Russian motherland. And that's something that Russia would have to respond to, not necessarily by invading Finland, but I think what you're seeing right now is that Russia is building up a significant military force from scratch that's going to be deployed along the Finnish-Russian border. And this force will include nuclear weapons. So, and Sweden produces good weapons. There's no doubt about that. Sweden has an advanced defense industry capability. It could serve as an arsenal of NATO, an arsenal of Finland. But I don't think Russia's losing any sleep over this. This is not going to be a repeat of, the 17th century. I don't see the Swedish army marching to Poltava and requiring the Russians to come out and defeat them. That's an ancient battle that plays a very historic role in the development of the Russian state, by the way. But
All right. Quick question for Tori. She was suffering from food poisoning or something like that. You don't have to come on camera, Tori, but just want to make sure you're doing okay. Are you all right, darling?
Oh, yeah. I'm all right. I'm doing
okay.
Just
Okay,
great.
sweetheart.
Thank you.
Milan Komler.
Jeff, I
from
want to
Moscow.
know, is the hot date between you and Tori, and I'm sort of the third wheel here?
I wish.
You wish.
Tori's getting some she says she's getting nervous from the big audience. I don't know if I should even tell her about some of the comments I've been seeing. There's a guy, I forgot his name, who's saying he can't even concentrate on the podcast we do Tuesday night because of Tori's, I forgot how he put it, something about her magical or mystical eyes. So anyway, by the way, that's Tuesday nights. If anybody wants to check us out, we'd appreciate it. We stream live Tuesday nights, Tori and I, on a podcast we call Scenes from the Evolution. Milan Komler from Moscow asks, how will Russia react to the total commitment to the German ideologues now sending tanks?
They will destroy the tanks. It's as simple as that. There's nothing NATO can provide to Ukraine that's going to offset the reality that everything Ukraine currently has in its arsenal, everything Ukraine will receive in its arsenal, will ultimately either be destroyed by Russia or captured by Russia. So if the Germans want to send the Leopard tank and the Marder, our infantry fighting vehicle, please do. I'd like to know how the German ideologues think that. I'll ask the following question. How much training has to go in to the German mechanics to maintain the Leopard tank? Is this a tank that is user-friendly? Is this a tank that has, very expensive German parts that break and need to be replaced by mechanics? I mean, reminds me, we bought a Saab in Germany, a car, a very good car, until it came time to change the damn oil filter. And you had to go down, they had a special tool, the oil filter, because Saab builds airplanes. And so they built the car like it was an airplane, the oil filter. Normally you go into a car, you can just unscrew the oil filter. Now this oil filter is up there. You had to lower things, boom, ratchet, special training course for that. That's the Leopard tank. Everything about it is complicated. It breaks, it needs to be maintained. And you're going to take a Ukrainian who doesn't have any of this background, hasn't been through the training, you're going to give him a Leopard tank and say, good luck. Russia's begging you to do that. Please do that, because what's going to happen, Russia has to wait. The tank will come, and it'll stop, and then it's going to die along with the Ukrainians inside of it. Same thing with the Marder. These are not simple, easy to use pieces of equipment. They're complex, modern technology that requires significant maintenance. So, normally Germans are smarter than this, one would think, but apparently not. No, I know the Ukrainians are saying, give us the equipment, but they don't really want that equipment because they don't know how to incorporate that equipment and use it effectively in battle. War isn't just about, pulling the trigger. War is won by logistics, and logistics includes maintenance. And the Ukrainians simply don't have the logistics tail and the maintenance capability to handle German tanks and German armored fighting vehicles.
Okay, somebody asked if I am the Jeff Norman who worked on Seinfeld. Well, I was on one episode of Seinfeld, and I was there for 2 days. So if you consider that working on, then the answer to your question is yes. But if you were thinking of something else, maybe the more standard definition of working on a show, you might have somebody else in mind, and the answer is no. Imad Mughaniya from Syria. What is your view on weekly in and out Israeli air raids on targets in Syria?
It's literally a violation of Syrian, sovereignty. It's a crime. Look, the Israelis operate as if they can do anything they want, anytime they want, because there's no consequences to that. Sooner or later, there will be a consequence. And I wouldn't want to live in Israel when that time comes. Again, Hosea 8:6, sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. I'm not too religious, but I like that biblical quote.
Yeah, you used that in your article this week.
I did. That's why I knew it off the top of my head.
I remember in the old days when you were sometimes critical of American foreign policy or Israeli policy, or sometimes the two overlap. That would be a clue, or people would take it, the anti-Semitic crowd would take it as a clue. And remember at the events, they would start questioning you like you were one of them. And you would practically want to strangle them when they acted like you are anti-Semitic. And you would talk about how you actually, you have relationships with Israelis, and you worked with the Israeli military personnel, and you respect them.
Yeah, I'm not anti-Israel by any stretch of the means. I think the Israeli people, again, it's like any humans anywhere. They're wonderful people. But I will say this, that I was in Israel at the beginning of this, the Aliyah, the return of the Eastern European Jews after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the floodgates opened, and suddenly the Israeli population went from around 5 million to over 6 million. So they literally had 1 million Jewish immigrants come in, and that fundamentally changed the nature of Israel. The Israel that I can't say fell in love with, but became intrigued with and became friends with, was an Israel that the people were struggling to find a way to peacefully coexist with the Palestinians. I know Palestinians can say the Israelis never did. I'm not here to debate that. I'm saying my perception was that, you had people like Yitzhak Rabin, who, was hardcore, but recognized that we have to find a way to peacefully coexist. That's why they assassinated him, because he was working towards peace with the Palestinians. You had the Israeli military people that I was working with, spoke of the Palestinians as estranged brothers, but not as hated enemies, but just people. We have to figure out how to live with one another. This is a problem that we have to solve. And these Eastern European Jews came in, and they don't have the history. They don't go back to the kibbutz, and they don't have any of the history of Palestinian Israeli existence or coexistence. And they just came in and they said, we don't want the Palestinians, and it fundamentally changed. I went back to Israel the last time, I think was in 2010, maybe. 2010. Completely different Israel. Wouldn't recognize it. Night and day. It was a nation under attack. I mean, you just felt the siege mentality, the nervousness of all the Israelis. The Israel that I was in the 1990s, they had suicide bombers going off every day that I was there. I mean, every time I visited, something horrible happened, a bomb. And I was in Tel Aviv, and the bomb's going off literally a block away from where I'm at. And so, I would see directly how that attack affected the Israelis. and they would cry. They would literally walk around the streets with tears in their eyes, but they would get on with their life and say, we're not going to let this disrupt our goal for peace. This is why we have to choose peace. But when we were there in 2010, we saw in Israel that was just paranoid about everything. They built a damn wall. I mean, it was a wall to wall off them from Palestine. And you got to see the wall to believe it. I mean, it literally is as oppressive as it sounds. And it just, so I don't, I have problems with the Israeli state as it currently exists. And frankly speaking, I have increasing problems with the Israeli people because collectively they no longer seem to be inclined to pursue peace. They seem more inclined to pursue conflict. And, so, I'm not anti-Semitic in every sense of the way, but, my position on Israel is evolving based upon Israel's actions. And this includes the arrogance of Israel to believe that they can violate Syrian airspace at will and bomb Syria without consequence, without repercussion.
Yeah, of course, it's ridiculous to suggest you're anti-Semitic, but there's a lot of ridiculous things that people say. And out of all the things that prompt you to figuratively bite the heads off of people when they are being obnoxious, I always loved it when you would go wild when the Semitic crowd would think that you were, on their team just because you criticized policy. Maria A.
It's like calling me anti-American for criticizing my government.
Yeah,
Really?
right. Exactly. It's the same thing. Maria A. from USA. Oh, come on, Maria. We're going to find you. I mean, I don't know if it's Minnesota or Texas, Maryland,
You're
or
going to
what.
find her. I'm not an online stalker, Jeff. That's your business.
All right. You say so. After World War I, Germany was ruined economically. People were poor and angry. Consequently, we got World War II and the Holocaust. To what extent might current events follow a similar pattern?
That is one hell of a question. And I mean that in all seriousness.
Well, since you mentioned that, I want to point out that the question was actually longer than that, and sometimes I have to edit it so it fits in. So those of you who are submitting questions, just keep that in mind. I may not always do the best job, but I try and reflect at least the spirit of your question.
Okay, so that was a hell of an edited question.
Yeah,
I'm giving you credit too. Tip of the hat to
I'll
Jeff.
take it.
You're rehired. You're rehired. But no, look, Germany's already talking about putting troops in the streets in October. Think about what I just said. Germany is going to put troops in the streets in October. Why? Because the shit is going to hit the fan. Germany's in a lot of trouble. Their economy is shutting down as we speak. The energy prices are going to go through the roof, and there's not going to be, in October, they're going to run out of gas. They're not going to be able to heat. They're going to have rolling blackouts, and they fully anticipate that there will be protests. And, I think I've used this before, but, there's the notion that every society, every civilization is 9 missed meals away from total chaos and anarchy. Germany's about to have a 9 missed meal moment in October, and then it's going to replicate itself throughout winter. It's going to get worse. I think that there is a real potential for a revolution, and I'm talking old school Bolshevik revolution, through the streets, burn the buildings down, guillotines, cutting the heads off, whatever. Germany could collapse into this revolutionary moment. And Germany has a history of emerging from this kind of societal unrest with guys that wear armbands with swastikas, and they have a twitch that makes their arm go up like this. If you think that the Nazi ideology has been stamped out in Germany, think again. It's alive and it's well and it's living. Ursula von der Leyen is proof positive. Things she says. Listen to the statements made by Scholz. Listen to Bauerbeck. Listen to the others, German politicians. These are all, Nazis in sheep clothing. And this revolution is going to empower the right wing. Right now, the German right has been, softened by people like Angela Merkel and others who created the veneer of civilization, of Western civilization. No. And if there's a revolution in Germany, what could emerge from that revolution is the kind of ultra German nationalism that replicates more closely what's going on in Ukraine today. And this should be worrisome to everybody. And again, I'll just point out the fact that this all could have been solved if the United States just let Germany turn on Nord Stream 2. We wouldn't have to be talking about the resurrection of the Fourth Reich. That would have kept the German economy functioning. It would have allowed Germany to have the kind of, economic depth to promote, democracy over the long term. But now what we're going to get is a collapse of German society. And I think the veneer of civilization gets removed. And I think what emerges is something very, very dangerous. That's the potential. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but the Germans are worried about it. That's why they're putting troops in the streets in October. Troops in the streets in Europe. And not because Russia's threatening to invade, because of the suicidal economic policies of Europe. This is all Europe's fault, literally. Europe is playing it. They're not playing Russian roulette. I used this earlier, but I'll use it today because I thought it was pretty clever. Russian roulette is where you take a 6-chambered pistol, you put one bullet in it, you spin it around and go click. Let me introduce you to European roulette. You fill all 6 chambers up with a bullet. So every time you pull the trigger, you blow your brains out with absolute certainty. That's what Europe did here. They committed suicide. Russia didn't have to do anything. Russia didn't want this. The last thing Russia wants in Europe is instability, because every time there's European instability, we go back to that earlier question. What the hell does Europeans do? Pivot and blame Russia and move towards Russia. Russia doesn't want that. They want a peaceful, stable Europe. That's why Russia continued to provide energy up until the last possible moment. Not to make money, they're making money elsewhere. This was to engender stability in hopes that the Europeans would wake up and understand they're doing the absolute wrong thing. Germany is committing suicide. Europe's committing suicide. And the other thing about revolutionary movements is literally once one nation goes down, it's a domino theory. There will be other nations that collapse. Look at the Dutch farmers right now. Look what's happening in the Netherlands. The Dutch farmers are very, very unhappy with these policies. Remember the Yellow Vest movement in France? It can be resurrected again, but big time this time, because the Yellow Vest movement was about, vacations and, medical care and all this stuff. The next Yellow Vest is going to be, I missed 9 goddamn meals. And so it's over, Macron. He can say, well, I was just reelected. You cannot remove me from power. No, we're going to pull you out and we're going to reintroduce you to what happened back in the first French Revolution. Guillotine. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but I mean, when you have a revolution, it's uncontrolled. It becomes violent, chaotic, and it replicated. Europe is a very fragile continent right now. Very fragile, very fragile. And they're ruined themselves with this stupid self-immolation. Will Russia join the Russian Federation in Belarus?
Scary indeed. Almost as scary as your German accent.
That was a French accent.
Oh, all right. It's not as good as your impression of Gore Vidal. That is a Hall of Famer.
Rudy! Oh, my God.
You from Florida, that's quite a handle there, you. Will Belarus join the Russian Federation?
No, not right now.
Let's keep it succinct, just like you's name.
Okay.
No, that's
the answer is no. Just like Belarus isn't going to mobilize. Russia's mobilizing, and everybody's looking at Lukashenko and saying, "Are you going to mobilize?" And no, we're not mobilizing.
That's the same in Russian, not Russian. I mean English, Spanish, and French. No, all the same, right? All right, we have now come to the final question submitted in advance. And another initial. Boy, we have a new theme going here. R from Boston. Can you please help me understand how SCO and BRICS are strong when 2 major participants those participants being India and China, don't even see eye to eye.
Well, that's curious you say that, because I actually just wrote an article about this. The Indian External Affairs Minister, sort of their equivalent of Foreign Minister, was giving a speech in Thailand, I believe, in July. And at that speech, he brought up in the question and answer period, he spoke of the potential for an Asian Pacific century, meaning to find somebody that can oust the American century in the Pacific that has been going on for over 100 years. And he said there can be no Asian century until India and China resolve their border dispute. But what was interesting is by bringing up the Asian century, that thought first entered into the global dialogue from a former Chinese leader, Deng, who said the same thing. He said, can't speak of an Asian century in the Pacific until India and China resolve their border disputes. And what was interesting thing about that is why would he say that? Why would the Indian foreign minister say this? Because he's sending a signal to China saying, hey guys, we need to get our collective acts together so that we can exploit this opportunity with the United States in retrograde. It's our turn. It's our moment to step up to the plate. And you know what China did? Immediately fire off and say, yep, we agree with you. Message received. And you know what happened right after that? They met and they're pulling apart on the border. They're resolving. It's not perfect. They haven't 100%. But instead of preparing to fight, because over the last year, they've been sending tens of thousands of troops towards the border. It looked like they're going to have more hooking and jabbing. They're withdrawing now. They're dismantling fortifications, joint patrols, pieces breaking out all over. And then they meet at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tashkent and in Dushanbe. Gosh, I'm fumbling here. Maybe Samarkand. They met somewhere in Central Asia, and they're getting along famously. India and China just agreed to. I mean, for nations, the question made it sound like they don't get along. Why did they just agree for a rupee yuan currency exchange? Enemies don't do that. They're talking about linking their two economies so they avoid the dollar, the evil dollar. They're doing that. They're doing that with Russia, with rubles. They're doing that with other people. That's done in the context of BRICS. They're talking about joint military drills and joint economic policy through the SCO. So no, I take the opposite, that the SCO and BRICS are going to dominate the entire world. Has Scott been drinking? Diet Coke, that's it. Dominate the world because they have common interests. And that common interest is the Pacific century.
All right, so let's go to the live audience. We have comments coming in from YouTube and Facebook, and it's great if you tip. Don't think that you can bribe us. Okay, you can bribe us, but if your question's really good, then we'll still use it. Sparty Matt, I am not a Trump voter nor a fan, but is it possible that the Russian Gate narrative was spread to seed Russophobia in Americans in preparation for Ukraine NATO to take Donbas, Crimea? Is the deep state that calculated?
Well, I don't think that I think the calculation that went into preparing the Ukrainian military to take the Donbass and Crimea came after. Russia Gate is a response to, it's a reflexive action on the part of the Democratic Party, which when Obama came in, there's a name that most Americans should know. Michael McFaul. He's a Stanford professor. He was the #1 Russian advisor for the Obama administration, ran the Russian desk at the National Security Council, and then went on to become the U.S. ambassador to Russia. McFaul is sort of the originator of the so-called Russia reset. That sounds sort of innocuous, the Russia reset. Why would you be concerned about the Russia reset? It wasn't Russia reset. It was regime change in Russia. That was McFaul's policy. You see, the Russian reset was about getting rid of Vladimir Putin, which is a prerequisite for the dismemberment of Russia, to return Russia to the status of the 1990s. But in order to do that, you had to keep this strong leader out of office. Because the Russian Constitution only allowed Putin to have 2 consecutive terms in office as president, he did a nifty little switcheroo. There's that word, Jeff, switcheroo with Dmitry Medvedev, who was prime minister. Putin became prime minister, Medvedev became president. And it was agreed that Medvedev would hold the presidency for a single term, and then they'd swap again. That was always the understanding. But the United States, McFaul, genius, thought that we could come in, and as we did in 1996, we can dominate Russia by buying off a politician. So we came in and we said, all those things you want us to do, we'll do with you, Medvedev. You're our man. We'll work with you. That's the reset. We'll work with you. And it just shows the absolute ignorance of McFaul and people who bought into this, because if you think that Russia is defined by a single individual, you don't have a clue about what Russia is. Russia is a nation. Russia, has, a civil service that is expansive, and it works from the bottom up, that is bigger than one person. And Medvedev not only wasn't able to do what the United States wanted, he wasn't willing to do what the United States wanted. But this was regime change. And how do we know? Because Joe Biden flew in March of 2011 on the eve of the termination of Medvedev's term. When it became clear that Putin wasn't going to go gently into the good night, Putin said, not only is he going to run for presidency, but his party is going to seek a parliamentary majority. Biden flew into Moscow and gave an address to the assembled Russian opposition. Now think about it for a second. You're an American, you're the Democratic Party, and you're getting ready to keep running to hold on to Congress and hold on for the presidency, and you have a Republican opposition, opponent, and the leader of Russia flies to the United States and attends the Republican National Committee and says, Joe Biden shouldn't run for re-election. Joe Biden, it would be bad for Biden. It would be bad for America. Would you call that interference? Yeah, I think so. And so, Biden went in there and gave that speech. He said Putin shouldn't run for re-election. Putin should withdraw. If he runs, it'll be bad for Putin, bad for Russia. And Putin went, really? Well, guess what? I'm running, and I won. He did. It was, but it angered him. That's also the election that Hillary Clinton famously tried to incite the opposition to come up and delegitimize Putin's victory, the victory of his party, calling the election a stolen election and illegitimate election. This of course angered the Russians. But wow, get me back on track of the question, Jeff.
Well, let's just move on to the next question. Also, I wanted to mention to folks who may be joining us for the first time that the majority of the questions that Scott addresses are submitted in advance, and you can do that at scottritterextra.com. And then once we get through all those questions, we try to get to as many questions as we can from our live audience. So let us move on to the next question, Tori. Life could be a dream. Shaboom.
Don't do that. Don't do that. You'll lose the audience. $9.99. I like this guy.
Why is the West driving Russia into a corner? It has nowhere to retreat.
Well, the West isn't trying to drive Russia into a corner. The West is trying to drive Russia into the ground. Again, the policy of the United States, NATO, and Europe has been since 1992 to weaken Russia, to dismember Russia, to make sure that Russia can never again rise up to the level that existed during the times of the Soviet Union, that Russia can't be a competitor, can't be an equal to the United States. That is the policy. We saw that policy play out in the decade of the 1990s. Vladimir Putin had came in and he said, we're not playing that game anymore. So we have begun a process of attacking Putin. That gets back to the reset policy, the regime change policy of Michael McFaul and Barack Obama and Joe Biden, by the way. So right now, there are people who, a lot of people have been quoting this week the 2019 study done by Rand Corporation about the various ways that the United States could undermine Russia, weaken Russia. And one of them, of course, was to strip Ukraine away from the Russian sphere of interest, flip it to NATO, etc. Again, the goal was to crush Russia, to break Russia up, to begin the process of the dismemberment of Russia. Never once in the Rand study did they anticipate that Putin would flip the script and say, not only are we not going to allow you to strip Ukraine away from us, we're bringing them back home. We're bringing Novorossiya back home. So Russia's not into a corner. NATO's in a corner right now. Think about it. Mother Russia just grew by a significant amount, population-wise, territorial-wise, and they're going to grow some more because of NATO's actions. Whose back's in a corner right now? Not Russia, NATO. So we do this to Russia because our policy has always been to dismember Russia, to weaken Russia, but Russia's flipping the script. They're getting stronger the more we pursue this policy.
Okay, how do we stop them? How do we as a population across the world stop these forces from continuing to war with each other? Oh, boy.
Elect better representatives who implement or formulate and implement policies that reflect your values. Until then, you're a prisoner to political and economic elites who have stolen the notion of democracy and have converted virtually every democratic nation in the world into a plutocracy. The notion that the United States is a functioning democracy is a joke. It's not. We're totally we're taken prisoner by a two-party system that's controlled by special interests and special interest money. So wake up, America. If you want to change that, take the money out of politics. That might be a good first step. We're going to go to the last three questions.
All right, we're at the 2-hour mark now, so that's appropriate. Rob Morgan, thank you for the tip. Scott Ritter, are you familiar with Whitney Webb's reporting on how the USIC has been infiltrated and subverted by criminals? How do we address and remedy this threat that handed W-8887 to China?
W-88 and 87 is nuclear weapon design. No, I am familiar with Whitney Webb's reporting, but I'm not. I haven't touched base with that in a long time because I've been focused on Russia. So I can't speak to it intelligently. If Jeff and Tori would be kind enough to remind this senile old man about that point, I'll do my best to answer that question next week.
Okay, consider that done, kind sir. Two more questions.
That's a waived question. So we have to. So here's number one for number three. Yep.
All right, so we have two more questions. As a Serb, Scott's thoughts about NATO in Serbia then and now. My family there is forbidden from chopping wood for winter.
Well, I'm sorry about the wood prohibition. I hope you have gas. Serbia. I think Serbia has been handed a short stick by NATO. We know that the 1999 conflict was promulgated on a lie. The notion that Serbia was committing genocide against the Kosovar Albanians is just a flat out lie. The CIA was funding the Kosovo Liberation Army, a bunch of smugglers, human traffickers, drug addicts. We empowered them to become a resistance force. And they carried out several attacks on civilian areas that the Serbian militia, Serbian military responded to. There was fighting and people were killed. There was one famous or infamous town, begins with an R, I believe, where the bodies were laid out, and the Western media came in and filmed them and made it appear as if the Russians or the Serbians had come in and slaughtered civilians. They didn't. These were combat forces fighting the Serbians. They died in combat. There was no genocide. There was no mass murder. But NATO used the notion of genocide to justify its military intervention under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, collective self-defense, where they suddenly created, even though NATO is not a United Nations member, they created as a security interest that assumed United Nations. Okay, NATO makes up whatever it wants to do. That's what happened here. NATO just made crap up, wrote international law from whole cloth. It has no basis in anything, but because the United States and NATO is involved, they got away with it. They attacked Serbia. They forcibly, they allowed a referendum to take place. It's curious right now that the United States, sham election. Then what the hell was Kosovo's referendum? Occupied state. Really, you had a goddamn NATO force occupying Kosovo, keeping Serbia out, and you're trying to pretend that that was a legitimate referendum. No, Serbia got screwed, and they're getting screwed today. Serbia is sort of the European version of Russia, feared because people don't understand it. They're using Serbia as a whipping post. I'm not saying the Serbians are innocent of every charge put against them. Look, what happened in the Bosnian conflict, I think all three ethnic groups should hold their head down in shame. What the kind of just mass murder, torture, nobody came out of that good. But the notion that Serbia alone was responsible for this conflict is absurd in the extreme. The Bosnians committed crimes. The Croats definitely committed crimes. All parties are guilty. But when it comes to Serbia itself and what happened with Kosovo, Serbia did not commit the crimes that it was accused of committing. And we know that. That's a statement of fact today. We know this. But they were accused of committing genocide. That genocide was used as an imminent threat to NATO. And therefore, they used that imminent threat to empower themselves, they being NATO, with the notion of preemptive collective self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. If that sounds familiar, because that's the exact case Russia made to go into Ukraine, except the Russian case is legitimate. There was an imminent threat to the newly declared independent republics of Lugansk and Donetsk. So the Russians tell the truth. The Russians are honest. NATO, less so.
All right, so the question that's displaying now, let's make that our official last question. But while Scott was chatting, Tori flashed a couple of other comments and questions on the screen, one of which was, how does Scott manage to get better looking the older he gets? I don't know if you want to address that, but I marvel at your lack of gray hair. You're what, 72, 73 now, and you have no gray hair at all. I don't get it.
Grecian formula. I don't know. It's just good genes, I guess. What I'll say this is my father had maintained his dark hair up until he didn't. And what I mean by that is sometime in my 70s, I fully anticipate that one day I'll look like this and the next day I'll be white. So yay, I got that to look forward to.
It happened to me a lot earlier. On our Tuesday night podcast, I don't wear the hat. So if people want to see what's really going on in there, you can tune in Tuesday night.
Wow. You're luring them in, Jeff.
Yeah. All right. So the final question, is there any place in Europe where you expect war or any kind of hostilities in the near future? Any kind of hostilities? That's very broad.
Besides Ukraine?
I guess.
Yeah, I think Turkey, Greece is a real possibility in the near future. I'm very concerned about what's happening in the vicinity of Transnistria, that the Romanians might become emboldened to do something pressured by NATO in Moldova. There's a lot of unrest in Moldova right now where we're seeing the potential for a power shift away from a current government, which has an anti-Russian policy, to be replaced by a more populist government that will be more sympathetic to Russia. That's something that could engender a Romanian intervention with the backing of Poland. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm very concerned about, West Ukraine. What could happen there? Are the Poles going to move into Western Ukraine? What would Russia's response be? What would Belarus's response be? And then the former Yugoslavia, the whole Balkan area, what's going on between Serbia and Kosovo. There's a real potential for conflict there. In the Srpska Republika of Bosnia, there's a real problem there too. A lot of unresolved issues that have historical roots in ethnic violence. And so anybody who speaks of European unity today, I don't think they've been fully appraised of what's going on in Europe. There's a lot of unrest, and the longer this Ukraine conflict goes on, the more instability is going to be engendered in Europe, and the more likely this unrest will manifest itself in actual violence. It's something I'm very concerned about. And then there's the whole revolutionary violence. I still think Germany's in for a very long, difficult winter that could lead to revolution. That in itself is violence. And once one revolution occurs, there's a potential for a domino effect. I mean, if you were lucky enough to go on a European vacation this past summer, that might be the last European vacation that people have for a while, because I think Europe might not look the same on the other side of winter.
Well, thank you so much, my favorite weapons inspector. We had another great hot date.
It was a hot one.
It was indeed. And Tori, thank you for overcoming. Same here. And the cat is out of the bag now. I've let it be known that my ancestors are from Russia, and I have a great warmth and font for the mother.
You'll be getting a lot of direct messages from admirers, Jeff. Now
maybe so. I don't want to make Tori too jealous, but we'll see. And who knows what the future looks. I don't think I'm quite yet to become roommates with Edward Snowden, but maybe a visit to the mother country is in order.
Yeah. Russia, if you're listening.
All right, so check us out Tuesday night. That's Scenes from the Evolution with Tori and myself. And then every Friday night, we have Ask here. And thanks to our beloved audience for all your great questions and for your tips and super chats and all that. And we'll see you next week.